Hey there, guys. So, back in the garage gym. Seal Rose, seen a few videos on it and has obviously surfaced again lately. Um, how would I rate the Seal Row? It's an okay movement. In terms of other rowing variations, I would probably put it at the base of the chain, and that's due to a few main reasons. One, if you say, for instance, did a Pendlay row, that requires you to hip hinge and move forward. So you're working your lower back isometrically at the same time. Versus, say, for instance, a seal row, you don't have that luxury. If you're fatigued after squats or deadlifts and, you want an easier variation on the lower back, then by all means, you could go for the seal row. But you'd probably be better off utilizing more neutral grip pull-ups simply because you're going to involve a lot more lat and you're going to get a little bit more, well, you're going to get some decompression through, I'm not going to say axial loading because it's the exact opposite. Your legs are acting as a counterweight, so you get a little bit of tractioning, which that can help with mobility through the lower back and just sort of loosening things up. With a seal row, you're working more predominantly upper and mid back. The thing I don't really like about the seal row, especially as you get stronger, is the fact, and it's very unique and only really applies to the seal row, but you get a lot of compression of your rib cage. You look at a traditional row or Pendlay row or any sort of dumbbell row, your rib cage isn't being compressed against a board. T-bar rows, depending on how you do it, and you might have used the old school machines, you'll get a little bit of compression in the chest. But like with a seal row, there is a lot more compression. And as you sort of fatigue, and the compression gets worse because you're not bracing, you'll find that your legs will kick around a little bit at the end. You want to try and limit this as much as possible as well, because you're just using too much body English. And if you end up with like a really dumb looking technique, or DT, technique for short, it really takes away from what you're trying to achieve. The goal is to work your back and hold the tension in that area. So you look at, say, a lat pull down or neutral grip, pull-ups for that matter. If you're holding yourself above the ground, you're always going to have some resting tension within the muscle. Like, it's still, I'm not going to say necessarily on stretch, depending how far you go down, but there's still tension within the muscle. Versus like a seal row and a Pendlay row, you're going sort of dead at the base. So you're losing that sort of kinetic spring, or that kinetic energy that you build up generally on the eccentric portion of the lift. Depending on what your goals are, like Pendlay rows and trying to be explosive off the ground, that can work well. But that also ties into your ability to brace and how effective you are at maintaining position and having the load still run through the lower and mid back. Versus, say, for instance, a seal row. If you were to replicate that quick enough, the only sort of joints that are going to bear the brunt of the movement are going to be your vertebrae, and they're not really designed to be sort of ripped into in that manner. It's a very unnatural position to be in. So like your risk reward goes out the window when it gets really heavy. If it's a lightweight and you're sort of holding the tension and sort of rowing through the movement and not going dead at the base of each rep, it can turn into quite an effective movement. I'd still, I'd choose another movement over it generally. But if, your lower back's fatigued and, you've done your squats and deadlifts and you still want to maintain like a good rowing exercise, you could do it then. I occasionally do it, but the heaviest I ever go on it is 100 kilos. I can't sort of give myself that risk reward benefit in going any higher, just because, there's too much compression then of the chest. And the reality is that's not a type of movement I need to do over and over. Like, On Friday, I did heavy squats. Lower back's a little bit fatigued, so you know what? I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm not going to deadlift. I'm just going to work this for a few sets, and sometimes I find this works well when I'm trying to warm up for other exercises as well. So from here, I'm going to continue on doing my neutral grip pull-ups. And in terms of like total back development, I'd lean more towards obviously the neutral grip because you know it's just a lot more natural in terms of how we're designed to move. You'll never really find ourselves in a position similar to a seal row, and like you look at the difference between say a bent over row again, or you know picking up a stone or a rock off the ground. You know, the muscles that you're robbing or not, you know, activating when you're doing a seal row, like the closest, you've got your spinae erector, which are actually really three muscles. So the one closest to it is spinalis, one next to it is longissimus, and then you have iliocostalis. So you have those three muscles which essentially make up your spinal erectors, and, you know, and they're responsible obviously for pulling you into extension. So, you know, if you're only doing a movement that's, say, a seal row, you're really robbing yourself of that real development through your mid and lower back. Like that's going to give you a lot of strength. And you know, if you're competing in bodybuilding or strongman, like strongman, you obviously need it for strength purposes and picking heavy things up off the ground. But same with powerlifting, you know, if your lower back's weak, if those three muscles are weak, you're just going to collapse forward under load, and you're going to resort to, you know, trying to drop really quick and catch the spring out the base. You're robbing yourself of a lot of muscle growth and a lot of strength potential. So I'd be very hesitant in, you know, making, say, a seal row your primary back exercise. You know, you can throw it in amongst all your other rows just to hit and work different angles. So from a bodybuilding perspective, you know, do your bent over row, do your pendlay row, do your dumbbell row, and then throw in a set or two of your seal row as well. So you get like a variation of angles. But as I said, just keep in mind, you know, when it gets really heavy, it's not great to compress your torso, you know, your rib cage just right into, you know, a platform. Like mine's wood, so it's a little less forgiving compared to some of the gym ones. But, you know, you look at any really strong individual and you're not going to see them load up this exercise with a huge amount of weight because you just run the risk of injury. You know, and if your technique's really bad and you're sort of like bouncing around everywhere, it really shows how much, you know, bracing and strength you've basically lost throughout the set. Like you just don't want to be in that position where your feet are just kicking around like a dead bug. It looks ridiculous, but it's also really bad for, you know, the movement itself. You just sort of like trying to, I'm going to say, muscle the weight up with no regards to the form or what you're actually trying to achieve. Like when you row as well, first thing you do, you grip the bar tight, then initiate the movement with your lat. So you're pulling your humerus up, you know, you're retracting your scapula, you're engaging your lat, and then you're bending at the arm with the row motion, as opposed to bending at the elbow joint first and sort of putting a lot of the tension onto the bicep and then ripping up in an awkward position. So they're just things to keep in mind. As anything, you know, they'll always have their place in training, but as I said, like for a main staple, I'd try and avoid it as much as possible. Hope that helped. If you guys have any questions, feel free to comment below. Otherwise, have a great day wherever you are.